Dr. Weston A. Price, Nutrition and Physical Degeneration. This is one of my favorite books of all time, but it's over 80 years old. And so I want to talk about, does this need to be updated or is it out of date? And if so, what do I think should be updated about it? So first of all, this is one of my favorite books of all time because, well, one, Dr. Weston A. Price, a fellow dentist, and someone who is also just obsessed with nutrition and how it related to oral health as well as physical health and fitness. But what I really love about this book was the studies that Dr. Weston A. Price did happened at a unique time in history where he traveled the world in the 1930s, 5 continents, numerous different countries where he was studying different races, that were eating different diets. For example, like because of the different terrains and climates and the food that they had access to. And there was this unique time in history where there were still indigenous populations who were not yet marginalized. And then there was the world that was being modernized by what he called the displacing foods of modern commerce. And so right next to each other in these different continents, he was able to compare and contrast these people, and he took meticulous notes and records. And so at this unique time in history, we had indigenous people that were still not marginalized. We had the modernization of these people. And we also had photography and airplanes, so he was able to travel the world. And this is basically a kind of study that we simply couldn't do today because most of the, I would say, indigenous or people eating closer to a native diet have been largely marginalized, and so it's hard to extrapolate that back in history. So, anyways, let's dive in and do a quick summary of the book, and then we'll talk about some of the things that I think he got right, maybe some things that we need to update. So, a brief summary. He studied these indigenous people, like I said, over five continents, I believe it was. I'm not going to go through all the different tribes and places he went because the book, over 500 pages, it gets kind of repetitive. And so what he would see is these indigenous people, they base their foods on seafoods or animal foods, some just dairy cultures, and they were all different because they were different terrains and they had access to different kinds of foods. For example, like the islanders that ate lots of marine food, Swiss who ate lots of dairy, Africans who ate lots of land animals. So he compared and contrasted all these different foods, but consistently those eating an indigenous diet, not yet where modern civilization had encroached upon with the displacing foods of modern commerce, they exhibited a remarkable immunity to oral decay, dental decay, cavities, even though they had little or most of the time no oral hygiene habits. They weren't brushing their teeth. They didn't have toothpaste. They didn't have fluoridated water. However, when, for example, governments connected a road and modern commerce that brought flowers and sugar, basically all of these cultures went from an immunity to dental caries to significant rates of dental caries, cavities. And that's not all. He also found not only was it the cavities, but his book's called Physical Degeneration. So we saw degeneration not only in the teeth, but also in basically craniofacial bones as well as the skeleton in general. So for example, he would see once the foods of modern commerce were adopted, those that adopted it post-birth, they would get decay. But those who were born with it their entire life, they had significant changes in their craniofacial bones as well as their skeleton. Like, for example, the maxilla, the top jaw, would be underdeveloped. This would lead to a pinching of the nostrils. They would become mouth breathers, inadequate development of the mandibles, so they would get crowding. We'd have narrow dental arches, as well as like not only a narrow, long face, but also a skeleton. And he noted the narrowing of the hips, and for indigenous tribes where childbirth was a seemingly like not huge issue, became like life and death kind of threatening due to these skeletal changes. So when the displacing foods of modern commerce came in, and what these foods are, he really emphasizes like these were mostly flour and sugar, and he mentions vegetable fats in passing. And I want to come back to that. And it doesn't surprise me because he's doing this research in the 1930s, and really these vegetable fats just started coming into kind of existence in the early 1900s. So it may have been 1-2 decades that these foods have even existed. So these were not the most prevalent of the displacing foods of modern commerce. That came, basically during this time period and after. So his main theory was this, that there was, in these displacing foods of modern commerce, the flour and the sugar, there was a lack of vitamins in these, especially the fat-soluble vitamins and minerals, due to the processing. And Dr. Price believed there was basically a calorie limit. So we could eat 2,000 to 3,000 calories a day, but after that, and I'll just quote the book, our bodies call a halt when they have taken enough calories to satisfy the appetite, but at the same time, they probably have not obtained enough of the minerals and vitamins sufficient for the daily requirement. So he thought the issue was we have like this food budget, and the sugar and flour is taking up too much of this budget, and it's not leaving enough room for the nutrient-dense foods, the animal products, to supply the vitamins and minerals we need to be healthy and prevent dental decay and such. So he gives an excellent analogy in the book that I'm going to steal and use time and again. Whereas, like, we have, if you imagine we have a car and it has a fuel, and this displacing foods of modern commerce, I'll just call it modern food from here on out, is like filling the car, like the tank of the car, and it gives you like the ability, the energy for that car to go. However, it does not give the energy to, let's say, fix the tires and put on a new coat of paint. Whereas if eating an indigenous appropriate diet, the fuel tank not only provides the energy for the car to go, but also when the wheels need to be repaired, it repairs it. When it needs a fresh coat of paint, when the battery needs to be charged, when you have the adequate nutrition in terms of vitamins and minerals, the car is able to self-repair and not only provide the energy for transportation. Okay, so that's the analogy he used in the book. I think it is a good analogy. I do think some of his ideas are incomplete, at least with today, and I'm going to get to that. But let's first go through his general recommendations, and then we'll talk about a few of the things that maybe need to be updated. So Dr. Price's kind of conclusions were we should focus on animal foods, in particular those high in fat-soluble vitamins like dairy, marine foods, animal fats, organ meats. He thought fruits could be just an adjunct because they were low in minerals. He thought vegetables were too bulky to allow for very much minerals to be obtained from them. Interestingly, a quote out of the book, he said, lettuce is the best of the raw vegetables. I don't know how he came to that conclusion. Maybe because it has the least amount of anti-nutrients and it isn't so bulky, so it won't fill up your appetite. That's where I'm thinking what he was thinking. So basically, it's the least bad of the vegetables, and it leaves you enough room to be able to eat more of the nutrient-dense food. And then he recommend, as far as starches and sugar, to cut down on starches and sugar, which I find that to be a little bit inconsistent with the rest of the book. Whereas, because he went to numerous cultures that were eating starch, like a decent amount of starches, for example, that still had immunity to dental caries. So that recommendation is a little bit curious because, for example, the Irish, he noted, would eat oats. The Swiss ate a good amount of rye. Islanders ate a good amount of this root called taro or taro. I'm not entirely sure how that's pronounced, but I think it was generally fermented. Regardless, he did come across a number of cultures that were eating starches and still immune to dental decay. But his general recommendation, which I don't disagree, when it comes to like a modern diet, cutting back on starches and sugar. Now let's talk about like what he missed or what I disagree with or what needs to be updated. And the first thing I think is obvious is he saw that we had like this calorie limit from 2,000 to 3,000 calories. In all 500 plus pages of this book, he does not once mention obesity or overeating or overweight. None of that. It's not mentioned over 500 pages. And so it makes me think that was obviously not a main problem of the time. And so he mentions we have this calorie limit of 2,000 to 3,000. No mention of overweight or obesity, and he only mentions vegetable fats in passing. And so I don't think Dr. Price got this wrong, but where I would probably emphasize a differentiation is the vegetable fats causing far more harm today than what did back then, which is not surprising because they were kind of new back then. Now they are all pervasive, makes up 20-30% of the standard American diet is these vegetable seed oil fats. They're in everything. And I also think this is probably likely why he didn't emphasize overweight or obesity, because I think one of the main drivers of obesity is these vegetable fats. I know we all blame sugar, and I believe also sugar and refined flours play a role in obesity, absolutely. But perhaps secondarily to these vegetable fats. And so kind of to wrap this up, I think where I might disagree slightly with Dr. Price, or maybe not just disagree, but add on, is his main focus was the degeneration caused by deficiency, especially the fat-soluble vitamins as well as minerals. And I think today we suffer, I think we do suffer from deficiency, but also abundance of calories, of overeating, largely caused by the vegetable seeds, the plant fats, as well as the refined seeds, which are the flours, and as well as sugar. And so I think we suffer today from not only the deficiency of the building blocks that we need for optimal health, but then we have this abundance that's associated with the metabolic dysfunction and disorder that is like the top risk factor for all our causes of death. For example, the number one cause of death is cardiovascular disease. Top risk factor for cardiovascular disease is diabetes, and the top risk factor of diabetes is obesity. And we can go through the top causes of death and like the chronic conditions of today, such as, secondarily is cancer. So top risk factor of cancer is basically obesity and smoking. And if we go to dementia, the top risk factor is obesity. So we have all metabolic dysfunction is kind of the driver of Price's degeneration today. And I do believe we are still suffering from we are starving for minerals, but we have an overabundance of energy. And so we have normalized tooth decay, we have normalized orthodontia, we've normalized wisdom teeth extraction, we've normalized difficulty, childbirths, things that he saw as like, oh, this is abnormal. We've now normalized these things that are associated with the deficiencies, but now we also have the problems of abundance. And so I think that is the one area of differentiation that, I might update or add on to Price's work. But when it comes to the book, I highly recommend this book, even though it is repetitive. It goes through all the cultures that he visited throughout a decade in the 1930s, providing us with research that simply cannot be replicated today at a unique time in history where we had people who were still eating indigenous diets, and we had the modernization of these diets just in parallel. And so it's kind of eye-opening, an eye-opening read, I would say. And anyone that I know who has actually read this book, it's a game changer, because it makes you look at nutrition in a totally different light. So hopefully you enjoyed the quick little summary, little update. And again, I think Dr. Weston A. Price is definitely one of the most, important nutritional figures of the last century. I think this is one of the most important books written in the last century. So check it out, or, if nothing else, focus on eating, heavy animal-based foods, just like Dr. Price would recommend. Get your fat-soluble vitamins, your minerals, and you'll greatly decrease the likelihood of suffering both the degeneration that he was very familiar with, as well as the modern suffering of abundance that is kind of plagues this society today. All right, see you in the next video.